Good afternoon. We are going to call the meeting of the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority to order at 12:10 on September 18th. Our first order of business is welcome and introductions. And what we're going to do is we're going to go around and introduce everyone in the room and online, because we have a new alternate for the Bi-State Working Group who will be appointed tomorrow, and that is Ben Berger. So my name is Jacob Anderson. I'm the current first co-chair of the Bi-State Working Group.
I'm Mike Fox. I'm a commissioner and second, co-chair of the authority.
I'm Arthur Babbitts. I am a commissioner and I am not a co-chair of the authority.
Grant Polson, commissioner.
I'm Kerry Witt. I am part of the consulting team that's supporting the commission.
And I'm Greg Hulsizer, also with HNTB.
Catherine Thomas, an alternate for a commission.
Marla Keithler, I'm a commissioner for the Bridge Authority.
Eric Wilson, alternate number 2, Bridge Authority.
Mike Sheenham, project manager.
Doug, would you want to introduce yourself?
Get off mute here. Yep, I'm Doug Gibson. I'm part of the commission and also the CEO and president of Mount Adams Fruit, local in Pigeon.
Ben?
Ben Berger, proposed alternate for the commission.
And do we have any other commissioners or alternates online? Hearing none. All right, we will move over to the agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda from anyone? I am not seeing anyone. Ground rules. We have rules.
We're gonna get into the presentation.
Okay, well, we will talk about the rules in the presentation. So we will begin with Greg for the overview of our process and our presentation.
Thank you. And I know that seems a little strange to start a workshop with rules. So I'll start first just by saying how excited we are to be with you today. And thank you so much for your participation and cooperation as we, over the past couple months or so, worked through the organizational readiness preparedness process for today. And I can tell you, having gone through 2 startups very similar to this, it promises to be hopefully fun and interesting, and maybe a little terrifying at a couple points, but you know, your consultant team is here, and this group is certainly well positioned to move this project forward. So if you take a look at the agenda, we've laid out an agenda that should get us out of here by 4 o'clock, and that's entirely up to you. And that's because this is your meeting. There's a reason that we call it a workshop. And we do have a lot of information to share with you, but we hope to invite a lot of dialogue. And look forward to hearing from everyone. And that's, I suppose, where the ground rules come in. You know, I have a few that I usually like to incorporate if you'll play along. One is we call the AYSO rule. You have AYSO soccer here? No? AYSO, their main rule is everybody plays. So if you're here, please jump in and play, because I took mind reading in college. I failed, and so you know, please just feel free to jump in if you have a question or an issue or whatever. I know you won't be shy. The second ground rule is we call the Aretha Franklin rule. Who can tell me what that is? Respect. That's right. And I've seen this group in action so far, and I see you work with a high level of regard for each other. But I always like to mention respect. Then the third one, I only have 3 for you today. The third one is we call the Star Trek rule, and that is where I ask you to please put your phasers on silent. So if you have your cell phones, if you'd at least maybe put them on buzz, I think that would be great. You have in front of you a copy of the agenda for today, so you can kind of see the flow of activity that we propose. We're happy to move things, you know, take them out of order, but there is a flow to it. And We'll be following this agenda. As items come up, we have a parking lot over here, so we'll capture some ideas. Today is really meant to get feedback from you of the work that we've done and some direction. But there probably will be some things come up that we'll have to say, we'll get back to you on. And so we'll put it in the parking lot, and we'll recap that at the end of the meeting. And you'll notice we've given you hard copies. That's because it's not always easy to read up on the wall. And so I encourage you to highlight, take notes, things like that. I would ask to please, if you can, I know the urge is always there, at least for me, to start flipping through the presentation and go to the end to see where this is going. You're welcome to do that. But if you would bear with us and just follow along, I'd appreciate that. So this is your meeting, and so we'll follow your lead there. So just to recap about the process, when I was here a couple months ago, we talked about the process of gathering information through a series of interviews. And thank you to all of you who participated in that interview process. Your feedback and your input was extremely valuable in getting us to today. And then in that interview process, we asked about things like organizational structure. We asked about things about why you signed up for this role. We asked for some of the things that could cause difficulties for the project, and we asked about committees. And so we're going to be going over all of that today, what you told us, with some recommendations for you, and looking forward to your feedback and to see which way you want to steer this ship. So I'll start off by talking about the interview results. And you might recall we had a series of questions we asked you, and then what we did, we took all that and put it together. And what we were looking for is similarities, primarily for things that you all shared in common, but also for outliers and things that we thought were worth bringing back to the group for discussion. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go through the interview questions, question by question, and I'll put up in front on the wall. And in front of you what the questions were. I won't read them verbatim, but then I want to talk about the responses that we got back from you. And at the end of each question, I'll stop and ask you if we got it right, or any other feedback that you want to give to us. We want to make sure this is very important as we move forward, and probably ask questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, can we all at least say that we're at an 8 on this? Try and get some type of consensus. So the first question that we asked you was kind of personal. Why are you interested in this project, and what do you bring to the table? And I have to say, quite impressive group of commissioners and alternates. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you would. This is what we heard. We heard that the good of the community was while you're all interested in doing this, and that this bridge is going to be very important to support the local economy and the community. It's a historic project, once in 100-year project. And then the things are important. We're going to talk about those, safety and accessibility, things like that. So we heard that you're all, at least what I heard, was that you're all deeply involved and committed to this project, which is a great place to start. And so the question that we have that comes up is, how to best utilize all of your talents and interests, because you can see the list there of, we have engineering and architecture and grant writing and all those different areas of background that you bring to the table that create an incredible mix of experience and perspectives. And so as particularly later today when we talk about the committee process, I think that's going to become very, very helpful as you all, we're going to ask you to select a committee to participate in. But clearly, as you said, as a full board too, these areas of expertise are going to be very, very helpful. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Is somebody on remote that's got their mic on? Because we're getting some feedback here.
Joe.
Can you guys hear us now?
Okay, we're back on. Good collaboration. So this is what we heard here, and I forgot to mention, the guiding principles. They're basically how we do things around here. This is what you want to be known for. This is how you want to be perceived by the constituents, by the users of the bridge. And so that's the things that you've listed here, and you can see them all: honesty, integrity, governing according to public law, focus on building the bridge first. The operations or transition operations and maintenance will happen down the road. We heard that. Let's focus on what's in front of us right now with an eye towards the future, following the guiding principles, and then you can just see being transparent. And so the question here for this one that I'll throw out to the group is, many times when an organization has guiding principles or a mission and a vision and guiding principles or priority statements, they codify that. They actually put it together in some type of written statement and incorporate into how they make decisions. It's usually on the agendas, the meetings, and things like that. And so, as your staff, as your consultant team, we're suggesting that we're recommending, if you're willing, that you direct us to prepare a mission and vision and guiding principles statement for the authority and for the bridge to talk about these type of things. And so my question, and I can assure you that it's not going to be some highfalutin 500-word dissertation that none of you can memorize. It'll be very simple, very straightforward, but will really ring true with you and with your constituents in terms of what the bridge and the operation and the authority is all about. So the questions would be, do you want us to do that? And number two, do you have any guidance for us other than what you see on the chart here, Commissioner?
Is it possible that that could be a preamble to the bylaws?
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. And that because it drives everything. So that's an excellent suggestion. So I guess I'm looking for feedback. Is this something that you're interested in having us do for you and bring it back to you? Okay, so it looks like consensus. Okay, I think I think this is on our last slide of the day, but I think we've committed to bring it back. I think October 9th. Your October 9th meeting is kind of what we're shooting for to do that. So okay, so everybody with me on that? We can move ahead to the next one. Am I too far, too close? Sorry. There you go. Thank you. That's good. Then the next thing we asked about was the functions, the various functions, and committees and various activities that it's going to take to get the bridge started up and to, okay, there you go, and to deliver and operate the bridge. And I'll make one caveat here in that we have a whole section that Carrie's going to lead in about 30 minutes or so about committees and activities. And we're going to ask you all to raise your hand and be volunteer or voluntold or whatever to participate in committees. And we're going to have a discussion about how the number of committees and things like that. So we can hold off on that discussion now. That would be helpful. But what we heard was that we had listed a whole bunch of functions, and we had originally suggested maybe 5 committees. And we listed a whole bunch of activities and functions that go along with development and operation of any toll facility. And we asked the question, do we have everything here? And does it all roll up into one of these 5 areas? And your answer was across the board was yes. We did hear that there was an interest in potentially consolidating committees, given the size of your board. But it was important that the committee members, whether they're made up of board members or alternates, that they all have equal status. The most important thing was that these committees be nimble, they be loose, they be very nimble to be able to deal with questions and issues as they come up. And by definition, that meant that maybe there was maybe only 3 people on each committee. And also there'll be some discussion later today, I think, about what public meeting law and what's allowed and things like that. But we'll be suggesting 3 per committee. The most important thing that we heard from all of you is that you all bring different things to the committees, but you need to speak with one voice. So, so when you're wrestling with questions, issues, it's important to take responsibility, say, I think this, I think that, I want to do this. But when you come together as a group, the idea of you're functioning for the benefit of not just this group here, but also all your constituents off into the future. And there's some discussion about starting with 1-year terms and then moving to 4-year terms that are staggered over time. So we will be talking about that. And then from time to time, you will likely want to bring in subject matter experts to help with particular topics. And so that's what we heard back from you. So I guess I would ask you, is there anything that you remember saying to us that's very, very important that you want to make sure that we capture in this part of the discussion? I'll ask that question first. Did we miss anything here or anything that needs clarification? We good? Catherine.
I have a question that's not, I'm sorry. If I take notes, I'm just wondering about, just because of our last brief, if I take notes on this at all, do I have to give this back? So should I take notes on a separate piece of paper? Do you see my question there? I'm sorry if that's totally, I'm scared to take notes, but I want to take notes.
Sure, of course.
So if I was to take notes, do I have to leave this here with you guys or just keep it forever?
You have to
till the end
retain
of the
that
bridge?
record.
Forever?
Keep your own paper.
Got it. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Are we missing anything? We okay? Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, everybody's with me at least at an 8 on this. Okay, and you'll get a chance, plenty of time to talk with when Carrie's up here in a little bit to talk about committees. The next section we talked about was organizational structure, staffing, and resources. And one of the key things we heard there was that we're just getting started. We're focused on financing, building this thing. We're not really sure the right to talk about ongoing operation structures and things like that, which we agreed. And so you won't see much of a discussion on that, but you can see the questions that we asked here on your handout. The greatest need, the greatest opportunity, things like that. And so what we heard was that let's focus first on how we need to staff, how we need to structure to get financed, to get funded, and to get under construction and get construction going. And so that's what the team is going to focus on. And that you expect it to be just like you talked about in your guiding principles, you expect your staffing to be lean and efficient, which makes a lot of sense for this project. One of the challenges that you identified was that there's going to be a lot of workers coming in once you get under construction, and there will need to be housing for those workers as they come in. And so there was discussion about how housing might be provided. And so that's clearly something on the to-do list to figure out, to see what unique creative opportunities there might be there. And then also the opportunity also to promote local jobs and encourage your contractors to hire locally as much as possible. But once you move towards operation, also to look for local jobs. And then continuing to share and utilize staff where it makes sense with the port. And there'll be discussion at some point in time about the timing of an executive director, and that's why you see it up in the box there. Don't know that you're ready to talk about that today, but at some point you're going to want to give us direction in terms of when to bring that on the bring that to you. And then one of the key things that came up was community opinion, making sure the community looks at this authority, looks at all of you, and looks at this project with the highest level of regard, with the highest level of that knows that you're showing the highest level of ethics, that you're showing the highest level of concern for the community and for your constituents. That just shown. So whenever, will suggest when we get to that point that when we get to even helping you hire, if we help you hire some staff, you want to hire staff that reflect your guiding principles and reflect your push for high levels of ethics and high levels of integrity. So like I said, the main question that seems to be on the table is at what point will you want to start talking about hiring an executive director? But this is what we heard in terms of, at least at this point, what you're thinking about, what you're you're thinking about organizational structure and staffing. So I'll stop here and see if you have any input on this particular topic. Commissioner?
I would say one of the critical things that we need when we're hiring people permanently for this organization is that they have to be highly qualified. Especially the first group, we don't want them learning on the job. We want qualified people from day one.
Thank you. We captured that. Great, thank you. Any other feedback or perspective on this? We got it right? Catherine.
So just going back to your guiding principles, when I would consider adding that focus, that very clear languaging of highest level of regard for the community opinion, we need to change the opinion. So I think if you're coming back and that's sort of where you're coming from and you come up with your mission, your vision, if you can just keep that in your framework, I just feel that would be able to speak to the community at better, and including the words highest level of regard for integrity or collaboration. I think that is just a really strong statement. You just captured it very eloquently in this presentation. So I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure we earmark that.
Okay, we'll capture that and make sure that appears in the draft if the rest of the group is comfortable.
So the change community opinion one, I'm a little concerned about that because it sounds like it's suggesting that the problem is that the community is thinking the wrong way. I don't think that's the case. I think that in time, the community will get to understand that what we are doing is the right thing and that we're reflecting their values and we're reflecting their needs. And I've just always found I've worked on a lot of problems where it's taken 5 to 10 years before people started to realize that, yeah, I guess things are really running the right direction now. And so I'm not sure how that was intended to be, but I am nervous about something that suggests that we're going to start with the PR push to change how people think, because you're never successful at that.
My recollection, and the other team members can fill in, is that probably a better way of stating this was engendering community trust, that everything we do builds that community trust. And you're right, that can take some time, but if that's the goal, then again, that's one of those guiding principles that we'll always keep in front of every decision. But I believe that was more the intent. Okay. Okay, ready to move on? Okay. The next thing we asked you was about, I call this black cloud thinking. What could go wrong, right? We do a lot of talk about planning and all the great things are going to happen and what it's going to look like, how it's going to operate, et cetera. But there are always things that can go wrong. And one of my former supervisors always says, take care of the downside and the upside will take care of itself. And I always want to make sure that we always organize and execute and make sure the bad stuff doesn't happen. And so you can see the questions we asked here about what are you most concerned about and what should the authority do to eliminate or mitigate the risks, and whose job is that? The answer to that, of course, it's all of our job, but there needs to be people assigned. So in terms of what you told us here was that if we don't get funding, we're sunk. Right. That's the number one thing we need to do is to get full funding. And we'll be utilizing lobbyists and encouraging the public to be in touch with local government contacts to help support that effort. And then attracting the best people and staffing and talent. Like I said, Commissioner Fox, you really don't want the team learning on the job, right? You want to have a top-notch team here. And so making sure that everything that we do as a team focuses on getting the right people in the right roles and organizing, executing for successful delivery and operation of the bridge. And then being able to make decisions quickly. Not laboring over decisions. That doesn't mean we don't think about them seriously. But as Mike has said many times, things are going to move pretty quickly at some point in time and not necessarily going to be able to, to linger. So the team will do the best job to bring you all the information, then ask you to make a decision. And if you want to take your time, we'll certainly have a conversation about what the impacts of that might be. But the idea here was that have a clear organization chart of committees and decision-making authority so they can move things forward. Then the question of aesthetics came up, and everyone knows that we want this to be a beautiful bridge. But the notes that I had reflected said we need to meet our NEPA commitments without impacts to schedule and budget. And I know there's a group that's working on the aesthetics of the bridge, and trust the experts and be open with the community was the other note that we took from that discussion. And then if we cannot get stakeholder agreements, and if we don't have good stakeholder relations, that can also be very, very problematic. And so we need to, we're encouraging you to build trust and ensure continuous outreach to engage the local community, and get the community members to participate in the committee meeting. So if they're up to speed and you're already doing a good job to begin to communicate regarding the project out in the community. So those are the things that we heard. Our recommendation would be what you see up in the box there. And that is that we need to organize and execute around each of these to make sure that they don't happen. So someone in the organization, the various committees need to be focused on making sure that we get funded, we have the right staff, et cetera. So what we would suggest is during the development of the project and construction of the project, there will be very detailed risk matrices that lists all the different things that could go wrong and what's the mitigation of those. But a lot of times those risk matrices don't include major things like this. And our suggestion is that you authorize us to include in the risk matrix these items, and that we make recommendations to you and to your committees in terms of how you organize and execute to make sure these unfortunate things or bad things don't happen. So I'll stop here and see if we've missed anything here. If on a scale of 8 to 10, you're okay with it. Anything we need to add?
So what about external risks? These are all things that we in some way have control over. Is there, I'm fine leaving that out, but I'm trying to understand where that's addressed.
There will be a section on the risk matrix that deals with, incident management, acts of nature, things that we cannot control. These are all things that we have a little bit of control over, but you raise a good point. And so we'll make sure that we include in the risk matrix those things that we maybe can't control, but could impact us. For example, the economy and what happens in Washington, D.C. and things like that could impact us, and that could fall under funding, but it could fall under other areas too. But we'll capture that and make sure that we include that in the risk matrix. Okay.
One I don't see up there is other governmental processes and decision makings that are outside our wheelboxes. Kind of been our holdup so far, but it's not even on there.
Okay, and I don't recall that came up, but that's a good one to add. Because if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that there are other governmental agencies that you need to go get approvals from or whatever, right? And sometimes your schedule's not their schedule, right? Your priorities are not their priorities. And so if the board is comfortable, we'll go ahead and add that one and make sure that it gets included in the risk matrix. We okay with that, everyone? That's a good one. Thank you. Anything else on the roadblocks to success? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie now, and he's going to talk about committee structures, purview, look ahead, and membership. And this is taking that subsection of what we talked about in the interview process and expanding it out. And he'll bring you what we heard and also our recommendations. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie at this point.
Thanks, Greg. So this is the point in the program where we kind of move from assembling all the ingredients that we've just gone over into the actual making of the sausage, which is putting this into practice. How do we make this all work? And if it isn't apparent to you by this time, by the end of the discussion, I think it'll be more apparent to you that there are just a huge number of issues across a wide spectrum of topic areas that need to be addressed over the next several years to make this bridge a reality. And that's just to get the bridge built, never mind, operating it and maintaining it in perpetuity, which we're not going to spend a lot of time focusing on today. But as we've talked about, the way that most successful agencies similar to yours with similar responsibilities handle that is by breaking those down into subunits and assigning committees to dig deep into the various topics and make recommendations to the board of directors. And so our recommendation is that you structure yourself, and I think we're headed down that path pretty firmly, that you structure yourself with some committees who, in a nutshell, their main duty really is to identify and then address and make recommendations to the board of directors about actions. But a lot of the work and the research and the information gathering that's necessary becomes the purview of these various committees. What we're going to talk about in the next half hour or so is kind of what kind of committee structure do you want to have? You know, how many committees and what is their purview? What are the topic areas that each of these committees will focus on? Kind of the logistics of the committees. How do they function? What are the reporting relationships? What are the responsibilities, et cetera? I already mentioned kind of the purview. What are the duties of each of the committees? And in addition, kind of break down and look at what are the things that we know are coming down the pike that are going to end up in front of these committees in the near term, say the next 6 to 8 months, and in the longer term, you know, between now and the opening of the bridge. And then finally, we'll end this section with a discussion on membership. And my hope would be that we would leave the meeting today knowing what the committees are, who the chair of each of those committees are, and who the members of each of those committees are. So hopefully you're ready. So buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. So next slide, please. So you'll recall during the interviews, we had identified 5 kind of topic areas that could be the beginnings of a committee structure. And we asked, you know, does everything that you imagine needs to be done in the next 5 years fit into one of those 5 topic areas? And the answer was pretty overwhelmingly, yes, it does. And so we started down that path, and it became apparent, and it was a discussion that you all had actually in a commission meeting, I think 2 meetings ago, that 5 committees seems like an awful lot for a group of this size. And so through some discussion and consultation, we narrowed that down into a recommendation for 3 committees. And we did that by combining some of the topic areas. And it seemed to make sense at the time that the committees would be one committee focused on funding and finance and engineering and construction. And those 2 topic areas are pretty closely intertwined, especially at this stage of the project. Another committee focused on governance, but also administration and operations. Administration, there's a small amount of administrative work to be done at this stage of your existence, but probably not a huge amount, and certainly not much by way of operations. And then communications and government relations was the other kind of large topic area. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in the interviews, and that I think is important to understand, is there is overlap. There will be topics that come up that will be within the purview of more than one committee. And it's important to remember that the process will evolve as you go along. I guess the recommendation I would make is that every issue that comes up have a lead committee, but certainly it is quite reasonable to say this falls mainly in the realm, say, of funding and finance, but we do need some concurrence from one or more of the other committees. And it wouldn't be unusual for a recommendation to go to the board from multiple committees. So as of 2 weeks ago, this was the thinking. And so what we want to do next is talk a little bit about how the committees might function. This is a workshop. I want anybody who has anything to say, any input, anything that we've captured incorrectly, to raise your hand, and I want to have this be a working session. I want to work through this, but the things that you told us were important with regard to how these committees work is, first of all, they're made up of authority members. And one of the things you told us loud and clear is you do not want to draw a distinction between commissioners and alternates. That if you're one of the 12 people who is on this bridge commission, you have an equal voice and equal participation in this committee structure. The second thing is that the committees would need a lot of support from your consultant team, from staff, and also from subject matter experts who might come from the outside world as needed. You made it clear that you thought each committee needed, and I agree with this, a chairman, someone to just kind of herd the cats on a daily basis. The committees should be able to work autonomously, schedule meetings as they desire, et cetera. But ultimately, there needs to be a reporting mechanism back to the board of directors. One suggestion was a monthly report to the board, just as a matter of here's what this committee is up to, and here's what they accomplished, and here's what they did this month. Separate from maybe recommendations where the board needs to take an action, but just a report on activities from each of the committees. The other thing is a recognition that this can all change and evolve as we go. We're going to learn as we go through, and what works, you know, Greg and I and Mike all have experience running agencies and reporting to boards like yours. But what worked in our agencies may not work as well here. We will develop our own way of doing these things, and we'll learn it as we go. Some of the concerns, and I'll repeat some of what Greg said, that you expressed in this area was you want the committee process to be efficient. You want it to be transparent. And kind of along the lines of efficiency, you don't want the committees to get bogged down by unnecessary process. We're a small agency. We have a tight schedule. We have a relatively uncomplicated bridge to build. There is no reason for us to get bogged down in a lot of process. So there needs to be enough process that it's legitimate, but it doesn't need to be unnecessarily bounded by process. So we're going to talk about membership on these committees shortly. But there was also a feeling, and this is being borne out somewhat by advice we're getting from our legal counsel so far, and we're expecting some clarification on this, that each committee ought to have no more than 3 members. And the reason for that is to avoid quorum issues. You don't want to have a full meeting of the board every time you have a committee meeting. And so the direction that we're taking at this moment is we're recommending a chair plus 2 members on each of these committees.
I have a question.
Please.
Since we're a voting body of 6, shouldn't that be 2 or less?
I'm sorry.
Since we're a voting body of 6, even though we're leaning on all 12, shouldn't the committees be 2 or less? I think 3 is going to not be possible. But a 3 majority vote, no?
It's that you don't want to assemble a quorum when you have a committee meeting. And so having 3,
I was thinking 3. Okay.
right? And that's not to say that that can never happen. It can happen. It's just that when you've assembled as what they call a committee of the whole or something like that, there are different rules that apply, and it does get more complicated. So as a day-to-day proposition, it's probably easiest to just have the committees consist of 3. Mike, did you?
One other thing that we want to run by legal is the role of a board member and an alternate when it comes to a committee. And I know we've said they should all have equal voice, but legally, what's the requirement there? Is a board member and 2 alternates considered part of a quorum because they're in the committee? And okay, and that's what we thought. We just weren't, we wanted to make sure because all the board members they're not available. It's not that they're not available. They're just not on that committee. And I didn't know if there was a distinction between those 2. So, okay.
I would also mention, though, that with only 3 committees and 3 members, that's only 9. And so that means there'll be at least 3 people who are not on a committee.
That occurred to us as well. So for each of the committees, we took a first cut, and this is just your consultant team and some casual conversations with different members of this body. But for the most part, your consultant team just looking at this huge list of things that's on our plate for the next 5 years and divided them up into which committee would have purview over these various things. And so I'm going to flash up on your screen now 2 things for each of these 3 committees. One is what we call purview. And that really is, what are the types of things that would come before that particular committee? Then the second thing is what I would call a look ahead. What are the tasks that each of these committees needs to have oversight of? Not necessarily that you're actually going to be doing them, because your consultant team, your staff will be doing most of the work, but what will you need to have oversight of? Both in the near term, which I define as being 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, and then the longer term, which is between now and the bridge going into operation. We're not going to think a whole lot about what happens once the bridge is open because your operational structure will change considerably and you may want to change your committee structure at that time. But between now and then, between now and late 2029, 2030, maybe 2031, when the old bridge is fully torn down, what are the things that we know are before you? And I'm going to put these things up and pause and have you tell me if you think we got it right. So for engineering, funding, finance, engineering, construction, this is the purview. These are the types of things that we envision coming under the oversight of this committee. And I'm going to pause here and let you take a look at those. I'm not going to read them each to you. Tell me if you think we captured it.
I'd offer up over on the engineering construction for the next, several years. A big part is going to be safety. Safety of not only the construction workers, but of the community interfacing with that. And that's not up there.
Very good. Other things?
Some of the things listed under funding and finance are also listed later under operations.
Oh, sorry about it.
Are also listed later under operations. They kind of dip into each other a bit. That's all.
They do. Those are things that and perhaps it was even in the course of setting up these lists in a hurry, duplicating some things, or maybe those are the things, and we can talk about them. Those are the things that may fall into the jurisdiction of two worlds, and that's okay. So if you're comfortable moving to the next step, go ahead, Mike.
And Carrie, I think at some point through this, maybe it's at the end, we should talk about, this isn't the end all list, right? This list is going to change as things change on a regular basis. It's kind of a live document, but there will need to be some delegation process for, just like you said, Grant, who is the lead and how does that happen? And that's something the board, I think, needs to have some thought on and have some discussion around, is how they want to handle that process. So
I have a question too. So as we're going through this and the breakdown of where focus will lie, and I think you mentioned this earlier, so I just wanted to confirm if I heard correctly, there could be some things that will fall under two committees, and both committees will serve a role in an action or oversight before something would go to the total board. Is that correct? Kind of what you're capturing?
Absolutely. Okay. And when we talk about a lead committee, and you don't necessarily even have to do it this way, but you might have an issue that, let's say, is, I'm going to try to quantify something that probably shouldn't, but it's 60% engineering and finance, but there's a 20% element of communications or something to it. You might say that, this recommendation comes to you from the engineering construction committee with concurrence from the communications committee. And I think that's one of the reasons why these monthly reports are so important, because it is important for the entire board to know what the committees are focusing on, because you may see something in a report and say, well, wait a minute, there's a very strong funding and financing element to that thing you're discussing over here in administration. Shouldn't that committee be consulted? And that's okay. In fact, it's encouraged. One of the things too, I think further to what Mike said, it is reasonable at various points in time. Most decisions are going to be made by the full board, but there may come points in time, and I think this is especially relevant for the engineering construction group that's going to be moving fast during construction. It would be reasonable for the board to consider delegating authorities to a committee and say, here are 3 options the committee's considering, and we're going to give them authority to pick the best one and go with it. Something like that. That's a level of comfort that the board is just going to have to come to, but that's very typical in agencies for when decisions have to be made quickly, for the board to give specific authority to a committee to make a decision.
This is feeling like a stovepipe, and I don't think it's meant to be a stovepipe. that there's gotta be a lot of communication going across all of the teams, like communication's gotta be involved on everything that we do. So they're gonna have to.
Well, not everything.
I'm sorry, and funding is gonna have to be very much involved over on the engineering side and going back and forth with the schedule and so on for cash flows and all the other stuff. And then, of course, governance, it's all gotta be, we can't make this thing where people think it's gonna be a stovepipe and you're not allowed to come talk to me because you're not on this. That's not gonna work. But we gotta make it where we can make things happen quickly. Or this thing will get bogged down and the costs are gonna go up.
I know we like to say we want to be nimble, but I understand where you're feeling that stovepipe mentality where we're like, we're getting far away from nimble right now real fast. I guess my thought is these committees are there to work on these projects that the overall board really, because everybody's got to be doing something at all times because we have too much to do. And so we're parsing it out. Saying that we're going to be on there for staggered terms or anything, I'd rather it be nimble. You might have 3 people on this committee this week because that's their abilities, but there's going to be people who have different skill sets that might move between committees at times. And so what I would say is you'd have the committee that's going to deal with these things. When a problem comes up, staff will talk to the chairs. The chairs will say, yeah, that's a simple thing. We'll deal about it with us all, or we'll send it to the committee. And then the committee can deal about it. And then that committee will have those people who are on it that are meeting regularly. And something might come up in their life and somebody else might step in because we have more people than we have committee spots. And so if it's more fluid, it's more nimble, and I think we'll be more successful.
I think the other thing we should kind of keep in mind is that the authority in itself is, while we're directing work, we're not really doing the work. We're trying to become knowledgeable about certain areas of the effort so that we can help clear obstructions from that. We're not down there generating calculations or figuring out how something's going to work. We're trying to make sure that when someone else figures that out, it's clear to go. So I think it's a different way of coming at that, more of a knowledge expert about certain areas and able to facilitate.
And then I just had a question. If we are divvying up work amongst each other and having work go to various committees, this is more of a legal question. I just want to make sure that we're not creating a serial meeting by all looking at the same thing separately and then having some joint recommendation to ourselves.
We will absolutely want our legal counsel. And they're going to be involved in every meeting and in the minutes of every meeting, and they're going to see how things are developing, and we'll say red flag. Folks, this is exactly the conversation that we want to be having. This is your authority. And you can set this up any way you want. And I have no real recommendations with regard to how you deal with some of the things we're talking about here. And I think the thing that we may want to do is be patient and let it develop and do it a certain way for a couple months, see how it feels, and come back and say, boy, that's not working. Let's make some modifications. I mean, I think that the suggestion that maybe membership on the committees can be fluid from time to time when it needs to be and when you need different skill sets. That's one that I hadn't considered, and I think it's a pretty cool idea. So I think, what we want to talk about today is it the right number of committees? Is it the right subject areas, et cetera? Now, the next slide, what we have attempted to do for each of the committees is to identify specific tasks that you'll be involved in. And I think to Commissioner Wilson's comment, the word I like to use is oversight. Your role really is to oversee people who are actually doing the work and prepare yourselves to make policy decisions. This is a list of what is in front of this one committee And if you just look at the near term, over the next 6 or 7 months, and I'm going to stop and just let you kind of absorb this list. And I'm going to ask you if you think we've captured everything, if there's anything glaringly obvious that we've missed, or anything that shouldn't be here.
I would say the difference between long-term and near-term, there's things can move from the right to the left very easily in this area. Like in your near term, we're in phase 1A, that's where we're gonna define all of the really big decisions. Constructability, what it's gonna look like, et cetera. Public interface in the next 9 to 12 months. So I see this committee being very much involved in that, and that will take place in this first phase, less or so in the second phase, long-term phase. But there's a lot of meat in both sides.
What the other thing kind of similar, I would say, is there's a lot of things in the near term that you start that are not finished in the near term, right? So there's a lot of those things that will continue on for a year, 2 years, potentially 3 years as you go through some of these items. So just because it's in the near term doesn't mean it's going to be done in 9 months. It's just a matter it starts in the first 9 months, and some of these other ones, may not start or are continuations of those starts.
I would just say, we should have picked our committees before they saw the list, because now they won't.
Yeah, this is when I said it is at certain times exhilarating and at certain times very scary. So that's exactly right, what we're looking at here.
So I have a different view of how this works. I am imagining, we hired staff to build the bridge, right? To make all these decisions. These are all lists of things that staff is going to be working on, and this is a subset of things staff is going to be working on. We have a board which is supposed to be overseeing that. There are specific items within that which need specialists who will take the time to dive a little bit deeper and to understand it better, so that they can better advise staff as to whether staff is headed in the right direction. That's what I think the committee structure is all about. It's not about doing all of this work. It's about providing the expertise on the board to oversee, so that we're effectively doing our oversight job.
I'm glad we're recording this, because there's some very good topics or very good points coming out of this discussion. I don't want to forget people that are joining us virtually. So I've been kind of talking to the people in the room. Does anybody, and I can't see you, and so if there's anybody on the line that would like to say anything, I'd welcome your comments and your thoughts. All right. So
I have a question. This is Ben.
Yes, sir. Hi, Ben.
With the 3 committees, how are they of similar level of effort for the committee members, or does some of the committees carry more workload, both short-term and long-term?
I'm gonna paraphrase what I think I heard, because you were very low volume here, but you're talking about, kind of an imbalance between the committees and the workload of the various committees. We're going to see some of that. And, one of the things that I think is really apparent is the workload of these committees and the distribution of that workload is going to change as we move from one phase of the project to the next, to the next, to the next. So for 1, 3, or 4, or 6 month period, a particular committee might just be absolutely swamped with stuff. And then they might get to take a breath while another committee is busy the next 6 months. And I think, part of managing the project, part of Mike Shannon's job is to balance all of that. Part of the chairman's jobs is to keep an eye on that and balance those things. Did I answer your question? Kind of, maybe.
Kind of. I mean, I think I was looking more specifically and just like it seems like this funding, finance, and engineering in particular seems pretty heavy. But I'd look to your expertise to weigh in on that and just how if this is a manageable level of work for a working committee to take on.
I could not ask for a better tee up for my next slide, and that is, I had exactly the same thought when I looked at this workload, and I said, holy cow, that is just an awful lot for any 3 people to take on, who many of whom probably have day jobs and, et cetera, et cetera. And so here is something I'd like to have you at least consider, and you may want to do this, you may not. It moves kind of in the direction opposite of what we were discussing 2 weeks ago in front of your commission. But I think you could make an argument that there's merit in splitting funding and finance and engineering construction back into 2 separate committees. And I would divide the workloads, or I would provide the things about this way. To something that Commissioner Anderson's brought up several times. There are also 12 of you. If there are 3 people on each committee and we ended up with 4 committees, the math actually works. And the engineer in me likes it when the math works.
And that was not why we decided to go for. I just want to say, it just was a coincidence that it worked out that way.
Well, I got the advantage of seeing this a couple of days ago, and I agree, there's too much when you look at the funding and finance and the engineering construction over the next 2 years. There's just too much in there for one team of 3. So I think it's a solid idea to split it up. But there's got to be good communication back and forth. It cannot be a stovepipe.
And I would just add to that, and it goes to kind of what Arthur said earlier, this would be a point where we do flex and say, hey, maybe right now it does make sense to have 4. Maybe we go back to 3 a year or 2 years from now, right? But right now it seems like based on what's going on, 4 feels like maybe a better approach right now. So
This will involve you finding someone to chair that additional committee, finding people to sit on that additional committee. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But am I hearing, is there consensus that this is a direction that you'd like to go?
My only concern is something that Mike said, but you were like scooting away from the mic as you said it. So I just want to make sure there has to be good communication between the funding and finance and engineering construction. Not that there wouldn't be, but I think that is extremely important given the RFP that we have coming out, and a lot of the questions that we've been asked are specifically about funding. So if we're going to the person, people that are going to be answering the questions for the contracts about funding need to be up to date with the most information, because we don't want to talk out both sides of our mouth, is just all I'm saying. So I just wanted to make sure that that was sort of raised again by Mike.
Yeah, the other thing with this thing, they've got to be close communication, because we may find an opportunity in construction to accelerate. But if the funding is not there, we lose that opportunity. So whatever we're thinking as an organization on construction, we got to make sure the schedule, we got to make sure the funding is moving right along with it, or we're going to lose it.
You can't. We can't have these groups communicating. The groups have to communicate to the entire board. They can communicate to the chair or to the entire board, but communication between the committees is a meeting. So anything that needs to be communicated has to be something that's shared with the entire group and with the public.
I would also like to point out that we meet every 2 weeks, so it's not like we're not all in the know pretty shortly.
I think with restructuring our regular 2-week meeting, we could definitely create a space in that meeting for those. I mean, we're effectively creating silos, so we need to create a place where we can break down the silo effect. And it seems by reorganizing that regular meeting could easily be done.
We have had a spot in the agenda for committee reports. We've been just verbally kind of doing them, but following kind of this and as the committees get going, that will become more of a formal area where each committee has a lot to, that I think will become a bigger piece of our meetings, where these committees will be talking about what's going on and making sure that communication happens at that point, so.
This is such an important conversation, and your recognition that we are in fact kind of creating stovepipes and your concern about not doing that, I think is something we really have to keep our eyes on and make sure that that doesn't inadvertently happen. But your awareness of that potential, I think, is a great place to start. One of the things I also want to mention, these are not intended to be exhaustive lists. And one of the things that we're going to do, yeah, they're not going to get smaller, unfortunately, but they're not intended to be exhaustive. And one of the things that's going to happen as you go along in your first few weeks of existence or first few months of existence as a committee is you're going to take a deeper dive into these things. And you may want to add to it, adjust it, modify it, whatever. The other thing is these are living lists, especially the tasks ahead, the look aheads. Things will come up that will get added to this list. Hopefully, we will complete certain things that get crossed off the list because we actually did them. And all of those things will make these lists pretty dynamic.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Which might be a workshop within a workshop,
Sure.
but going back to our last meeting where we were talking about the design of the bridge and aesthetics, which we know is a point that the public's going to be paying attention to. There was talk about a committee that would be formed with membership from the public and key stakeholders. So how does that interface with this? Are we envisioning that one of our commissioners that will be seated on engineering and construction is then the person from the commission body on that, so that there's at least continuity of that information, making it to the right place for these design milestones?
Yeah, and I would say we could do that a few different ways, right? I mean, staff wise, we will be sitting on that committee, which will be, and that's committees required by the NEPA commitments. So staff will be participating in that, and we will be reporting back out to the committees and the board on what's going on with that committee, as well as having the presentations and different things related to that. So you could do it different ways. I mean, you could either say, okay, that committee needs to report to the engineering committee and then they will report to the board, or you could just have them produce something that they come every so often and produce and present to the board as well. Because it will be kind of a quasi separate committee from these, in the sense it'll be made up of public officials and not public officials necessarily, but public and staff trying to work through recommendations on the aesthetics. So it'd be kind of up to you all on how you want to, layer that as far as how they report back to you.
I would really recommend though that one person, at least one person from the committee sit in on that, because it has such a massive impact on the rest of the bridge. There's going to be other little working groups that I could foresee that's made up of HNTB and perhaps even the engineer out of whoever we select. We don't have to be involved in every one of those, but the big ones we want to be knowledgeable of. And if we need to shape it a little bit, we've got the intelligence to shape it and bring it back to the board when we need to bring it back to the board.
Yeah, and I would say rely on staff to come to you and say, hey, there's something coming up in the next meeting that you need to be there for, and checking in, us checking in with the co-chairs, but also the committee leads, that if, say, communications, there's a big thing. We've got a public hearing coming up for the aesthetics committee. That shouldn't happen without you knowing about that and being prepared to help with, help with that public hearing or public meeting that we may do on aesthetics. So I think there'll be a lot of that where it's just going to be people communicating, and there'll be times where we probably don't do it as well as we should, but I think that's also key where, you're not going to be able to be in every meeting at every, or, I mean, unless you want to volunteer even more time than you're volunteering now. I would say use us to make sure that you are informed, and we will figure out that balance of how much you want to be informed and whether you're getting informed the way you want. and just adjust as we kind of go forward with that. But, I'm cautious of your all's time of how much, you have other things to do. So I would say, not overwhelming yourself and feeling like you have to do that, and use us to make sure you're getting what you need.
Oh, so, yes, sir.
I'm still kind of processing, I think what I'm hearing you say, Mike, and what Marla's saying, and I think what we're getting to that we haven't spoken a whole lot about is we have certain requirements that we have to meet for the bridge. And there's certain things that have been stipulated, but there's also a requirement that is unwritten to actually be accepting of what the public wants and somehow be able to grab that information. I don't think we've really cracked that nut yet. It's out there. I think Marla, I've heard raise that kind of question. The Gorge Committee is probably part of that, but I don't think it solves the whole thing. So we probably need to keep talking about it.
No, I think it is. I mean, just like the aesthetics committee, let's use that as an example. We will, once we get a little more formed, come to you and say, hey, here's the committee, here's the makeup, here's how we got there. And then you all can weigh in and say, well, I think you need to have these other 5 people on there. Or did you talk to these other 5 people about this? And we can either, yeah, we did, and this is why we ended up where we are. And we can, we'll say, hey, we think we need to have 3 meetings of this group and over this period of time. And if the board's like, that's not enough, you need to have 6 meetings. We'll make those adjustments based on kind of you all providing that direction of where you want to go. But that's kind of the balance I see in it, is us coming and saying, hey, here's the plan, here's what we're looking to do. Does that meet your all's expectations of where you want us to be? And are we doing and outreaching the way you want us to do?
We're gonna learn a little bit as we go. So we're gonna be doing some adjusting, I'm sure. We're not gonna get it right the first time.
I think being tolerant of that iterative process is important. And being tolerant of maybe not getting it right and having to redo something minor, not some of this big stuff. We don't want to do this twice. So we did attempt the same exercise on the other 2 committees. Fortunately, the purview is a little bit more concise for those, but let's move to our thinking on governance, administration, and finance. This is the list that what did I say? Oh, government administration operations. Thank you. This is the list that we came up with of the obvious things. Does that seem right to you? I'm not hearing that it doesn't seem right. So, yeah. And look, this is not intended to be the end all and be all, but yeah.
Maybe add.
Go ahead.
Where's the governance in that?
Good question. What would you add to that list, Commissioner?
Governance.
Okay, since that's the title of the committee, let's add a bullet for governance. That's a good catch. Thank you. Do you want to get a little more granular about that? Or, I mean, is it things like development of bylaws, those kinds of things? Or what when you say governance, what do you mean? Sorry.
I'm not gonna trigger the feedback. It drives me crazy. When I say governance, it's how are we non-employees interacting with each other, and bylaws are certainly a critical part of that. But there may be other elements related to how we speak with each other, how we communicate with each other. So I think governance really captures it. But yeah.
Again, good catch. That was an oversight. And again, this is a committee that initially in the first several months is probably going to be very heavily focused on governance, just setting things up and bringing it, maybe, creating an organization out of thin air and have it become a smoothly operating organization. As time goes on, there will become more and more operational things. And there are operational aspects and even administrative aspects to running this authority even before the bridge is open. There will be monthly bills to pay. There will be things like that. And so to that end, we've identified, I think, the list of near-term and long-term things that this committee would be involved with. And I'll pause here and let you take a look at that list.
I know, right? I just have a question because, so here it has the progressive design build, RFP and contract as the near-term look ahead for government administration and operations. Can you give me just a little bit more details to what you think that is? Just because of the engineering and construction, that would seem to me to have two groups of people having to come together about something, which would cause a meeting. Okay, I'm gonna mute now.
No, I think this is probably a prime example of, and we put that on this list thinking in terms of procurement policy and things like that around this, not the technical content of the RFP, but the procurement, the compliance with procurement rules, et cetera, is probably more of an administrative function. Probably could go either place.
Yeah, I would say it kind of belongs here for long-term procurement capability. Administrating contracts, change orders to contracts, the mechanism of it is owned here. But for our particular project, what we're changing is governed by the other group. How you get it changed in the contract belongs in this organization. That which would include legal review and all the other stuff.
Perfect example of this multi-committee jurisdiction that we've been talking about.
So in that particular case that Commissioner Fox just brought up, it seems to me that the governance committee piece of that, the piece you just described as being the purview of the governance body, is what we've already accomplished by taking Hood River County's rules and adopting them. So it's simply, this committee may be responsible for that, but there's nothing to be done, right?
Well, I would offer up today, probably no. A year from now, we may see that how that procedure pushes you is not the way we want to operate, which means we're going to have to rev up that program.
And I would say, there's also contract changes that'll happen on the PDB as things, add a contract, or we have to do a sub-agreement for something, add a sub-consultant for some reason, for a specialty thing. It would be that oversight of that contract piece would also be a part of this administration and operations, as well as invoicing, and those would fall under the administration piece. So it's where those other pieces get added to governance, create, additional tasks that are outside of governance, but still part of this committee.
I feel like you just described what staff is doing.
It is, but it'd be the oversight of the committee and maybe the policy or how we're, paying or the invoices, those kind of things. The staff will have the processes for how they collect it, how we get it processed, we get it to get to be paid. But the policy around that would be something this group would talk about.
So the way that, just again, put this in words, the way that I see this is that staff will be doing this work. We as a commission are all responsible for everything that staff does, but we as a commission are depending on the people in this committee to be the people who actually read the things more carefully and know what's, and are more aware of what's going on and more in a position to highlight something that maybe the committee wants to read more the commission wants to read more carefully as a whole.
And just for example, even just the invoicing, right, is gonna be very complex on this project because you've got Washington State law and Oregon law related to labor laws, right, that are gonna have to be done. So somebody's gonna have to make sure people are charging at the right time and the right place and all that. Staff will do all of that, but then this committee will make sure to kind of oversee that stuff's happening.
So we have a choice here. I realized that I worked you right through a break that was on the agenda. If anybody would like to take that break, and then come back for the last committee, we probably got another 20 minutes in the committee discussion. This is an incredibly good discussion, so I don't want to break the momentum, but people need bio breaks and other things. So you tell me.
Why don't we break till 1:35?
4 minutes.
1:35.
1:35.
Oh. I'm looking
That
at
clock
the
is
back
off.
clock.
It's
Okay.
1:26.
That's 9 minutes. We'll reconvene at 1:35. Thank you. All right, folks, let's go ahead and reconvene. Chairman Anderson, I don't know, do you want to call us back to order, or are we already technically still in?
Well, since you said it, we're already there.
All right, awesome.
But did we need to turn the recorder back on? And that's why I don't talk during intermissions.
Amen. It's that old hot mic thing, right? Yeah. Well, if there's no other comments on governance, administration, operations, I guess somebody did whisper in my, or Scott whispered in my ear, and I think this is another one you may want to consider here, is staffing. Is this the committee that would handle staffing? I think that's
Staffing, HR.
those kinds of
I was
things.
gonna bring it up, but you put staff needs, so that's all encompassing to me.
Perfect. So, yeah, well, and we said here, personnel handbook, those kinds of things. So this is, I think we've covered that. So same exercise we went through on communications and government relations. Now, that list looks a little bit lighter than some of the other lists. And that reminds me of probably my favorite song lyrics in any song is from a Grateful Dead tune called Uncle John's Band. And it says, when life looks like easy street, there's danger at your door. And this is an illusion. This is not necessarily an easy committee. And in fact, I would observe there is no easy committee assignment. And I certainly didn't see this in the interviews, but if there's anybody who's looking for an easy committee assignment, this may look easy. It's probably as difficult or more than the others, because the what this committee is going to do really spans everything that this commission will be working on over the next 5 years, and effectively communicating that to multiple stakeholders, which means multiple languages, not actual languages, but you got to speak the right words to government relations and agency people. You got to speak the right words to your stakeholders and to the public and to the media. All of that is included in this group. Did we miss anything here? I'm looking mainly at Commissioner Kiefler.
So the one thing I would put on here, grant applications. I do think that this committee has a key role in making sure that the story we're telling in some of those applications, that most of the expertise formulating those are coming to it from a different mindset. And so I would push that those applications get reviewed or pass through this committee before we would be going to the full board saying it's ready to hit send.
Very much agree with that. Very much agree. Anything else for this committee? So let's take a look at some of the tasks that we know are ahead of this group in the near and long term. Take a look at this list.
What's a GR? GR events?
Government relations.
Oh,
So that would be the staff events or the legislative events that we do. That's those acronyms that we throw around and assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. Probably shouldn't. All right. Yes, go ahead.
and communication plan would include communication outreach into the public. I'm thinking as we go into 1A and we start setting up this aesthetic review committee, getting that communicated out would come through here. So knowing that schedule for the first 12 months, where you see the important injection points are that we want to communicate with the public. If that's in the communication plan, cool.
Yeah, and that was the thought when we put it up here, is that's kind of that quarter ahead, look ahead, where it's, the next quarter, next 6 months, this is what we're going to be doing. So it's a living, again, kind of one of those living documents that is forward looking at, what events are coming up, what GR is coming up. So
We had some other word for it, but in an earlier slide, we had the concept, one of the overriding goals or principles of equity. And I'm feeling like this is where equity should live as an item. I don't see it listed.
Yeah, and the communications is funny because it looks like three simple lists, right? It's like, 6 or 7 bullets, but there's like so much inside of each one of those bullets. It's a little unfair to say that it's, three or 6 simple bullets. But yeah, equity would be in every one of those things, and and part of like the communications plan and grant applications would talk about equity, and how we do public meetings is going to talk about equity. And so I think there's so much inside of each one of those bullets. It's hard to.
I mean, I would actually say that equity needs to be under governance, administration, operations as well, or as the first start, because it's going to hit first on tolling policy and these decisions that are really about trying to account for disparities in the public once we're maintaining this infrastructure. I don't disagree that communications has a role too in making sure everyone is being connected with and informed, but I think there's another piece of equity that is much more about some of the decisions in a different committee.
Also, if you think about equity, so talking to the contractors is like the labor that they're going to be using and having it be equitable in that way as well. So I think if equity is actually maybe one of the pivotal maybe words that we all agree is important to every single committee, that might be where we're all coming from an equitable construct as opposed, I mean, not that hopefully nobody's coming from a non-equitable construct, but if we all agree that that's really important to us, because it is important in governments and in communications and in engineering and in funding too. So just a thought.
No, I think there are a couple of things. Safety was one of them. I mean, every single decision you make ought to have equity at least be a consideration. Is this fair to everybody involved? Okay. If there's no more thoughts, and again, the next step is for each of the committees to decide their things. I'm going to turn this over to you all. We have decided here today, I think, to move in the direction of having 4 committees. And so I have put up on the wall, I haven't yet, but I will, put up 4 lists, 4 boards. And what I would love to do is have you guys spend the next 10 minutes amongst yourselves with no input from us, deciding who is going to be on those committees, who is going to chair those committees, and who is going to be on those committees. Now, I believe, and one of the chairs can correct me if I'm wrong, you already designated chairs for a couple of the committees. And so Commissioner Fox was designated as the chair of engineering construction. Commissioner Keithler was appointed the chair of communications. And Commissioner Babbitts was appointed the chair of governance and the other things, administration and operations. Thank you. Commissioner Anderson.
Based on what everybody had already done
Sorry.
Based on what everybody had done on their lines, because we all already completed this exercise, and adding the 4th one, I would say, when I look at all the names and piece it out and also know all of you and your expertise, it would make sense for me that Commissioner Keithler chair communications and government relations with Jake E. and Catherine. This is just my idea. If they agree to it, then we can write it down. Governance would be Arthur Babbitts with Grant and Doug. The engineering would be Mike Fox with Eric and Seth. And then finance would be Jacob Anderson, Nathan, and Ben. Based on kind of where everybody said they were looking at. Does anybody not like that? And we can make some changes.
You've got some here that are.
I know, that's why I went through where they said, and then kind of figured it out based on the ones that only said one. Yeah.
Well, no, totally. I also expressed that because I didn't know where I was needed most. And at that time, I had no idea about my travel restrictions. So I also want, when I did go in, I said I can be put anywhere. I think I have aspects anywhere. Personally, in this moment, I know that not trying to cause a kerfluffle, but I've been really involved with the RFP and meeting with all the different contracts. So I would like to be considered if Mike will have me. I don't want to, I'm not trying to step anyone's toes. Not that I don't want to be with communications, but
It's okay.
okay. I also don't really want to be with communications because it sounds terrible. Just kidding.
This is Doug. I'm happy to help on the communications piece. I don't know about chair or anything to that, but I can help out.
Doug, are you saying something?
Yeah, am I on mute? No.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're just real quiet. Yell at you.
Oh, I'm happy to help out on communications as well.
Didn't fix the problem, but thank you. So if Catherine were to be on, I was just talking about engineering, sorry. No, sorry, I misspoke. When that would have been the engineering committee. The reason I figured Eric and Seth is because one's an architect and one's an engineer. And but if Catherine would like to be on the engineering, that means Eric or Seth would need to either move to communications or more switching.
I think Eric's last statement demonstrates that he has far more understanding of finance than he claims.
I'd be switching more chairs on the Titanic. The next one would be with governance and finance. Grant and Doug, are you both willing to serve on that? And we can close that up. Governance, administration, and operations. I apologize.
I can do that. You might want to flex me in between that one and the finance one, but I can do that.
Can we go one by one here? We're talking governance, right? So governance has a chair, Babbitts, and now Grant is saying he could be on it, and Doug has agreed that he's okay to be on it, or he would like to be.
But I think the point that Grant made, and my first thought when I heard that we're going to have a finance committee is that Grant is degreed and an expert in finance issues. So it might be a better use of him to focus him there. I don't know Jake's background in that area, so I don't.
I would put Grant as the chair just so I can get out of it.
And that really, I know you're joking, but it totally makes sense because as chair of the board, that's a real job, right? There's effort there.
For 2 more months and then it's Mike.
like it more and more all the time.
This crosses that line into voluntold. Grant, are you amenable to that?
Yeah, I could chair the finance committee and take care of that. I've chaired committees before. I have no problem continuing to do that sort of work.
So a recommendation on the funding and finance. What this is gonna entail is close cooperation and understanding of engineering and construction in that project. So a person that may fit very well there is Seth. Because of his background.
Sounds good to me. Let's ask him.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like we started in a weird place. Like, could we go around all commissioners and just say the one single committee that is your top pick?
That was gonna be our next exercise.
Yeah, because okay.
Seth, are you there? Oh, he's totally voluntold then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can be on governance, administration and operations, and then we could have Grant and Seth and Nathan on finance, if you'd have them.
On finance, I don't see Nathan's name under finance.
So also under the engineering from the old one. So when he said engineering, because that was where the finance was when we were having that conversation.
So we're saying governance is seated, Chair Babbitt's, Doug, and Jake Anderson. Is that correct? Okay, check. So now engineering and construction has already been working and it seems like also potentially full. Chair Fox, Eric, and Catherine. Okay. So finance is Chair Paulson, sorry, Grant. And then now we're trying to decide between Seth. I think, though not yet seated, incoming is Ben Berger, who I believe has finance experience. I don't know if he wants to give a pre-appointment preference.
I certainly have more finance experience than communications or government relations, but I'm happy to serve where is needed.
Nathan did express that he was willing to be on the communications though.
So as a potential funding and finance board, Chair Paulson, Seth, and Ben. So then communications would be Nathan and Jake. Right? Or no, Jakey. Yeah. Okay. Governance. Oh, Doug did say communications too, but he said he was willing to do governance. So
Nathan and Jakey.
Who'd want to make a motion? Just kidding. I think in Oregon too, you can still make decisions during a workshop. It's always a public meeting. But we're not going to. And kind of how, remember, these things might be fluid as needs change and arise. What I can say though is that the people that were willing to volunteer for all this highly paid work are experts, and I'm really happy to be working with all of you.
If I could just jump in, so you brought up an interesting point in just about Oregon law. Any noticed meeting, any legal business can happen, but usually organizations have in their bylaws rules that they will not act on things that haven't been noticed, or where have not been put on an agenda. And so I expect that we will adopt bylaws which say that we're only going to talk about things that we published on an agenda.
I would move this discussion be pushed to the governance committee. Was that faster than you thought it was going to be, Carrie?
That was fabulous. And so the part you've all been waiting for, I'm done. I'm gonna stop talking. Sit down.
All right. Well, we got through quite a bit of stuff already today. The next couple things are not super extensive, so we'll get through these. Go ahead. So what you see on here is this is kind of an overall schedule that we've been looking at on the project. And really the point in this is that, you know, the committees, as you all get together and start looking at your purviews and start developing your short-term and long-term activities, this is really there to help you and guide you with some of the key activities that are going to be coming up. We will also have subschedules that we will use for each committee to help support them in upcoming activities. So we will share those with the committees as appropriate. And that way those committee chairs can also take a look at that and see where they're needed, what's upcoming, to help you look ahead and help to, you know, just make sure that the staff is facilitating what we need to do to keep the project moving. There's a tremendous amount of activity, not only in the short term, but long term to get this project through to construction. And this, you know, we just wanted to really introduce this to you all, make sure you're aware of it now that you have your committees, to take some time to look into this and, you know, start to get your thoughts around where you'll interact and where you'll, your group will be needed to provide input based on these key elements. All right, any questions on that or questions on schedule? I think you guys are all aware of the general big schedule, and
You could have posted that backwards and we wouldn't know the difference.
we will bring shorter schedules to each committee and help you to make sure that you are on track with that.
We're on the home stretch here. Thank you so much for your participation. So we'll do feedback last. Action planning, we've been taking notes as we've gone along, so you will see those reflected as we update these materials and they come back to you at your committee level. I noticed we don't have anything in the parking lot, so there's nothing to respond to there. But if you take a look at the timeline here, I see that I misspoke. I think I said earlier that we'd bring the draft mission and vision statement to you on October 9th. It looks like we've committed, at least here, to bring it back for the 25th. So I know I'll be working on the flight home. Anyway, that'll be ready for you there. But in the meantime, you can see the activities are after that, sometime between now and October 8th, we would like the committees to meet once they're formally established at your next meeting, and establish your meeting schedules, your monthly or whatever, and finalize the purview. And so the team will work with you on that. And then we'll come back on October 9th to finalize the purview, meeting schedule, agendas, things like that. And that's the time frame right now. And then you see on October 25th is your regular meeting with the bylaws update. So Commissioner Babbitt.
So in terms of meeting between now and then, I believe there's significant work staff has to do to figure out how we can do that, since all of our meetings, because these are advisory to the decision-making body, all these meetings are public. So there'll have to be some slots created and sort of a methodology to allow us to meet. So it's going to take those folks a little while to figure that out.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, we need to, I think, get some guidance from legal. They're putting together a one pager of kind of what those committees can meet, can do without noticing a public meeting, and then where they will fall into the necessary requirements for a public meeting, because I think there will be times where they'll meet and it won't be something that probably needs to be a public meeting, but there will be other times where it will. And then we need to talk to the chairs about how often you think you want to meet, and get some of that organized over the next few weeks.
So one way to do that, the mechanically can be very simple, is we will have our own facility. We can schedule and notice a committee meeting every, twice a week, regular times, open a YouTube channel into the empty conference room at that time. And simply, if there's a meeting, there's a meeting. If there's not, there'll be a notice posted that there is no meeting today. But just get things regularly scheduled, and then we can just take those slots.
Yeah, and just for information, and this will come back to the group for more of a decision on Monday, the 25th. We are down to one location for an office space. It's Radcom's office down here. We're working on getting the final lease agreement terms and working through that with the co-chairs. We're hoping to have all of that worked out so that on the meeting on the 25th, we can bring something formally to the group to say, hey, here's where we're at. But my hope is that by October 9th, we will have that space available to us, and that'll be our long-term meeting space from here on out, and then we can set those things up.
And can we get Redcom to set up the video system before they leave? Okay.
We are keeping their video system as part of the place. So yeah, it is fully set. It is fully set up with everything we need for audio videos. So
I think it's going to be really important to, as quick as you can, get these guidelines out from legal. And I would encourage us to not just turn it over to legal and give us their impression of what we should be doing. We should be telling them what we want to do and get them to tell us, no, you can't do that, or here's how you could do that. So when we're in these small work, I call them working sessions, I really question, and if we have to, we have to, but making that a public meeting. Especially if we're, we may be sitting in on some of these industry reviews of the RFP. I don't think we want that to be a public meeting. That's right.
yeah, and I think that, that's a good example where the committee, there's 3 members there, but they're listening. We're not having a discussion. We're not making a decision. We're not making a recommendation. It's a meeting there to gather information. And I think that's where we want that guidance from them on, that doesn't need to be a public meeting. So, and the board will need to decide if they're all okay with that approach. But I think there are a lot of things like that that will happen that probably don't rise to the level of needing to be a public meeting.
So yeah, it is. I'm trying to think of how to say this with all appropriate candor. There are public meeting rules, and then there's the way the port does things. And
I'm
so,
not talking about the port.
no, I understand. No, the point I'm trying to make is that the example that you've seen, that you've been learning from a public meeting, is the port. And I really don't think that's a model that I would like
That's
to
why I'm looking
promote.
for guidance.
Right, exactly. That's why I brought it up as an example. In this situation, when you have a meeting of the committee where the committee is going to be talking to each other about something, then that has to be a public meeting. It's going to have to be noticed. It's going to have to be available for the public to attend, but not necessarily to speak. But if there is any sort of presentation that you go to, or you're learning about something, you're all sitting there as an audience, that is not a public meeting. That doesn't make it a public meeting. It's only when there's a meeting where there's a discussion happening, where members are interacting with each other. You can all go down to, to some place where you can all go and watch a movie together, sit in
No, I
on a
get that.
seminar,
I
all
get
that
that.
stuff. Yeah.
But the real life examples that we're going to face, and it's gonna expand a bit, is that I go down with Mike and we go visit the tribes, and we're trying to negotiate an MOA for the use of the water. I can easily see one or two of the committee members tagging along to understand what's going on there, and they may inject a comment into the meeting. Does that mean it's a public meeting?
And this is where the attorneys will tell you how you avoid making that a public meeting, but you will be able to do that. Yes.
Yeah. So the key point there is, we tell the lawyers, here's what we want to do. You tell us how we can do it.
Right. I'm fine with that.
I think just to help guide maybe feedback for legal when they're giving us this brief that I think we're all going to want to really understand fully. I would be curious for them to get into like the two qualifiers, which is how we designate them in Washington state. So what separates it and allows our committees to meet without being public meetings is that they are not taking public testimony and they are not making a decision on behalf of the full body, which our committees never do. And these committees, based on how we just mapped them, won't either. So it would be interesting to understand, and I'm sure the Oregon representatives, some on here already are really knowledgeable on that, but especially for us that are going to be always shifting back and forth, it would help. But back to Mike's point, I think it helps capture those two capture pretty fully to me. It's been helpful to think of it that way when you're trying to make that determination if something about that you're about to do is outside of a boundary.
So unfortunately, Oregon law is really different on this point. It's basically the entire process of deliberating towards a decision is public. And so if committee members are advisory to the people who are making that decision, then all of their interactions become public meeting. So it's just a really different concept, and that's why we got the advice that we got.
And so on that testimony component, does that trigger committees having to accept public testimony or no? Okay, so it would be helpful to just know when we are clear in that lane of not having to add that to every.
So for my clarification, because we have a huge RFP coming out and we've all reviewed it and we have comments about the RFP that we want to discuss or I don't know, streamline. So for my awareness, I cannot email Mike and Eric and say, hey, these are my comments. Do these align? Well, I'm just making sure for clarity for my own. I cannot email, I have to email staff and then staff will distribute to committee, correct? Or I guess that's my question, because I mean, we have a huge, I don't know how many comments you guys have, but there's a lot going on. So just making sure I'm not messing up.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. If you have a Google Doc and you're adding comments on the Google Doc, does that make a meeting? Is that public? And I would ask the attorneys that. I can't answer that one.
This is what we've set up. This is how we plan on operating. Can that committee, because it's only 3 of them, work collaboratively while reviewing an RFP or not? Because that's why we didn't set 4 people on that email chain.
Because if we have to meet for 3, we might as well add more people to the committee if if you know what I mean? Like, why are we kind of putting?
everything is.
Yeah, I didn't mean it that way, but I mean, there are some, like, there's a huge lift coming up, and so it might be, and it's the RFP is I think the first hurdle. So I mean, if we can increase more people, Seth, come back on the commit, that kind of thing.
Just remember, we're oversighting and we're providing some guidance. So I think 3 that we've got here, that's a sweet spot. You get 5, 6, 7, then you're not gonna get anything done, in my opinion.
With this RFP example that you gave, the way that I've done things similar to this in the past is there's a review copy. We each can submit comments in the review copy, but we're not discussing them with each other, and we're not there to get other people's review comments. All of those comments are for the staff member who is in charge of the document.
Well, I'm not trying to solve this one. But what we're talking about here is a very, very early draft RFP document that went out to industry. And industry is providing comments back in this week and next week. And our team wanted to get at least to the same level. So as we're sitting in, listening to these comments, we can put it into context.
But there's no board decision associated with
No.
this, so there's no problem. You're not advising the board on something that they're going to be deciding on.
Right.
Anything else?
Just one final comment, if I might, on behalf of your team. Thank you. You've been engaged, you've been efficient. And we got exactly out of today's meeting what we had hoped for. I'd like to just really quickly, if you don't mind, I always like to end these with what I call plus delta. I'd love to hear back from you, some feedback, what has gone particularly well and what we could do better next time, because we can always, one of my favorite things, you don't have to be sick to get better. And I know you may have some ideas in your mind now how we do this next time, how we could improve. So if you want to give us that feedback, now would be a good time. If you want to adjourn, that's your prerogative, but any feedback you want to give us would be helpful.
I would make one comment that give us about 3 months where the committee's working. And then I think it probably would be worth an hour or 2 hours getting feedback of how those committees are working together or not working together. Are we sharing the information that we need to share? Are we following the process of governance? And have another session like this to kind of look back on what we're doing. It doesn't have to be very long, but sometimes just stepping back away from the process, look at it. Is it doing what we want it to do? And if not, let's change it.
I'll throw it. I'm losing the acronym right now, but there is an acronym for that where it's basically you set up a process, you go ahead and implement your process, evaluate your process, and then adjust. And there's a little slick acronym for it, but but that would be a helpful thing. Next time I would suggest a darker pen for the graphics. So that's your delta. And I love that we stayed ahead of schedule. Thank you.
My constructive criticism is we need an audiovisual expert on this panel.
We will in the future have one right next door, so.
The problem is that for 20 years, I was an audio video engineer, but no one ever asked me.
Problem solved.
If you have to be asked, you shouldn't be on this board.
It is like chalk on a blackboard every time I am involved in this stuff, because I'm extremely attuned to audio quality issues, compression issues, all that stuff. And just everything that goes on here is incredibly painful to me.
Mike Fox will buy you a beer to deal with your anxiety. Anything else for the good of the order, family, teams? I like to end meetings early.
The bridge is gonna open 2027.
Okay, with that, with nothing else, and no real public present, unless there's anyone from in the room or online who'd like to speak, or give us your constructive criticism. With that, with nobody raising their hand or coming forward, I would like to say thank you to our staff for putting this on and for lunch, as well as all the committee members, and we will adjourn this meeting.